The morning of third cycle, year 247 of Coalition Standard Time, began the way most mornings did in the cold room of Barracks 4. Quiet, lit by the pale blue work lamps that the overseers never bothered to dim. Still, 142 humans stood in the pre-dawn dark of an agricultural moon called Kessler 9, and an old woman named Marin Holloway stood in front of them. She was 67 years old. She had been a schoolteacher in a small town in the Canadian province of Manitoba before the voluntary integration, which is what the Coalition called the annexation. She had taught fourth grade for 31 years. She had buried a husband and lost a daughter and survived the relocation and 3 Kessler winters. And she had, 3 years earlier, started something that the Coalition's surveillance drones had been recording the whole time without understanding. She asked the people in the cold room to say a name they had not said aloud in 3 years. What happened next has been reconstructed from the sealed tribunal record of Coalition v. Holloway, the partial transcripts recovered from the surveillance archive of Barracks 4, and the testimony of 17 humans who survived Kessler 9 and were later interviewed under conditions of legal protection. I am Senior Archivist Liaison Threnovat of the VTHRE delegation. I have been assigned to compile this record for tribunal review. The events I describe are not in dispute. The meaning of those events is the only thing this report attempts to settle. A man in the third row spoke first. He said the name of his brother, who had died 11 years earlier in a refugee column outside the city the humans called Lyon. He said the brother's name twice. He said the brother was a baker. He said the brother had 2 children whose names he then also spoke. He spoke for 90 seconds, and then he sat down on the floor and did not stand up again until the morning shift bell. A woman spoke next. She said the name of her mother. She said her mother had not died, that her mother had taken the cultural reassignment in cycle 245, and that wherever her mother now lived, her mother did not remember the name she had just spoken. She said the name a third time. She said it slowly. She said, "I am the only person on this moon who knows she was ever called this." The Coalition's drones recorded everything. The drones logged frequency, duration, biological stress markers, and linguistic content. The drones did not flag the gathering as a security event because the gathering produced no weapons, no escape attempt, no damage to Coalition property, and no measurable disruption to the morning agricultural rotation. The drones recorded 142 names that morning. This is how an empire failed to erase a species that refused to forget. Part 2. To understand what the Coalition was so unprepared to destroy, the tribunal must first understand what the Coalition had spent 11 years allowing. The voluntary integration of Earth was completed in year 236 of Coalition Standard Time. The annexation was, by the standards of Coalition expansion, bloodless. The humans had no faster-than-light capability. They had no orbital defense system worth the name. They had a planetary population of 9 billion, divided into 193 political units, that could not coordinate a unified response in the 73 days between first contact and the signing of the Concordat. The terms were generous. Earth retained autonomous administration of its surface and seas. The Coalition received mineral extraction rights on 6 of the system's lifeless bodies and the legal authority to relocate human populations under conditions of demographic stress. The humans signed because the alternative had been explained to them with photographic evidence from 3 previous integrations. 2 policy frameworks produced what happened next. The Resource Concordat of year 236 permitted the Coalition to relocate human populations to Coalition-administered worlds for the purpose of agricultural and industrial labor. The Cultural Stabilization Act of year 240 permitted the Coalition to designate specific human communities as candidates for what the Act called managed cultural transition. Between the 2 frameworks, the Coalition relocated 2.3 billion humans over the following decade. Kessler 9 received 14,000 of them. The Moon is the fourth body in orbit around a gas giant in a system the Coalition designates by a sequence of numerals that no human on Kessler 9 ever learned. Its surface is frozen for 9 of every 12 cycles. Its remaining 3 cycles permit the cultivation of a hardy tuber that the Coalition uses as protein feedstock for 3 different client species. The agricultural operation on Kessler 9 had been running for 91 years before the humans arrived. It had previously been worked by a species the Coalition no longer mentions in unsealed records. The humans were assigned to 47 barracks. The barracks were heated. The food was adequate. The medical wing functioned. The Coalition's administrators on Kessler 9 had been instructed that the humans were not prisoners but reassigned agricultural workers, and most of those administrators believed it. What the Coalition had not anticipated, and what the Cultural Stabilization Act had no provision to address, was that the humans of Kessler 9 began, within 18 months of their arrival, to organize their entire interior lives around the preservation of information that the Coalition considered legally erased. The Coalition's legal framework recognizes identity through 3 categories: species designation, functional role, and Coalition registry number. The Coalition does not assign personal names to its citizens. The Coalition's largest client species, the VTHRE included, do not use personal names in the human sense. We have designations. We have titles. We have role honorifics that change as our function changes. The humans of Kessler 9 had personal names. They had personal names for their dead. They had personal names for the towns they had been removed from, and the streets in those towns, and the dogs they had owned, and the teachers they had loved as children. They had personal names for things the Coalition's translators could not categorize at all. The Coalition had legal authority to relocate them. The Coalition had legal authority to reassign their labor. The Coalition had legal authority, under the Cultural Stabilization Act, to offer them neural reassignment that would replace their pre-relocation identity with a Coalition standard one. The Coalition did not have legal authority to make them forget. The humans discovered this. It took them 18 months. Part 3. By cycle 244, the human population of Kessler 9 had stabilized at approximately 13,200. 800 had died in the first 2 winters of conditions the medical wing classified as adjustment-related cardiac failure, which is the Coalition's standard diagnosis for the death of a relocated organism whose biology was not consulted before relocation. The survivors had organized themselves. In private, in the cold rooms of the barracks where the surveillance drones recorded sound but not meaning, they called what they had built the remembering. The structure was simple. Each barracks held a gathering once per week in the hour before the morning shift. One human spoke, the others listened. The speaker chose one name, a person, living or dead, from before Kessler 9 and said everything they could remember about that person, where the person had been born, what the person had done for work, what the person had loved, what the person had feared, what the person had said the last time the speaker had seen them if the speaker could remember. If the speaker did not know a fact, the speaker said, "I do not know," and continued. Fragments were permitted, guesses were not. The dead were given equal weight with the living. A woman who had lost her entire family in the relocation column spoke for her sister, her father, her mother, her grandmother, and the boy she had been engaged to marry, on 5 separate weeks. By the end of the 5th week, every other human in her barracks had memorized the 5 names and the basic facts of the 5 lives. If the woman had died the next morning, the names would not have died with her. This was the rule, though it was never written. You are not the only one who carries them now. The first circle had begun in Barracks 4 in the autumn of cycle 243. It had begun because Marin Holloway had been watching the children. There were 173 children on Kessler 9 who had been born after the relocation. They had been born in the medical wing. They had been registered in the Coalition Registry. They had Coalition designation numbers and Coalition standard names assigned by the registrar. Names like Subject 4 Alpha 7 and Subject 4 Alpha 8 and Subject 4 Alpha 9, which the children's parents refused to use and replaced with the names of their own grandparents and aunts and the friends they had lost in the columns. Marin Holloway had been watching the children, and she had realized in the autumn of Cycle 243 that the children did not know who their grandparents had been. The parents had stopped talking about Earth. The pain of remembering had become, for the adults, a thing they did not inflict on their children. The children were growing up without history. So Marin Holloway, who had taught fourth grade for 31 years and had a teacher's instinct for what a child needed in order to become a person, asked 7 of her neighbors in Barracks 4 to come to the cold room one morning before the shift. She asked them each to say one name and to tell her everything they remembered about the person that name belonged to. She wrote nothing down. She had no paper. She listened, and the 7 neighbors listened, and the next morning she asked them to do it again with different names. By the end of the cycle, every adult in Barracks 4 was attending. By the middle of the next cycle, the practice had spread to 11 other barracks. By cycle 245, all 47 barracks held weekly circles, and Marin Holloway was no longer running anything. The thing had outgrown her. The thing was running itself. The children sat in on the circles after their 12th birthday. The children began, by cycle 246, to carry names of people they had never met. This was the structure the Coalition's surveillance drones recorded for 3 years without understanding. The drones logged the speech as non-productive social vocalization, low priority. The drones flagged nothing. And then, in the spring of cycle 245, the Coalition offered the humans of Kessler 9 a way out, and Marin Holloway watched it work. Part 4. The Cultural Reassignment Program was announced on the first day of the agricultural rotation in Cycle 245. The announcement was made by the Moon's senior administrator, a Coalition official named Yul Veshkoren, who had arrived from the Inner Systems 4 months earlier specifically to oversee the program's rollout. Administrator Veshkoren was, by every recovered record, a reformer. He had written his graduate dissertation on the long-term psychological costs of relocation. He had advocated within the Coalition's Cultural Stabilization Bureau for what he called humane transition pathways for displaced populations. He had personally lobbied for Kessler 9 to be designated as a pilot site for the program, because he had read the early surveillance reports from the Moon, and he had concluded, with what the records show was sincere concern, that the human population was suffering. He was not wrong. The humans were suffering. The remembering was not painless. The weekly recitation of the lost was, by every account from survivors, the hardest hour of the week. People wept in the cold rooms. People could not eat for hours afterward. People dreamed of the names they had spoken, and the names other people had spoken, and the accumulated weight of a community that had decided to carry its dead instead of setting them down. Administrator Veshkoren saw the suffering. He did not see the structure that produced it. He concluded that the suffering was the result of unresolved relocation trauma, and he designed a program to resolve it. The terms of the Cultural Reassignment Program were these. Any human resident of Kessler 9 could volunteer to submit to a neural archive procedure. The procedure would transfer all pre-relocation memory into a Coalition data archive and would erase the original from the volunteer's neural tissue. The volunteer would retain procedural memory, language capacity, professional skills, and post-relocation acquaintances. The volunteer would lose every personal memory of Earth. In exchange, the volunteer would receive full Coalition citizenship, relocation to a temperate world of their choosing from a list of 17 approved options, a new Coalition standard name, a stipend sufficient for comfortable independent living for the remainder of the volunteer's natural lifespan, and, if the volunteer desired, a coalition arranged marriage to a member of any coalition species capable of human-compatible bonding. The coalition believed the offer was generous. The coalition was correct. The offer was generous. 3,812 humans accepted within the first cycle. The community fractured. The records of the fracture are partial because the humans who left did not, by the program's design, retain the memory of the community they had left, and the humans who stayed were not, by the program's design, permitted contact with those who had gone. The fracture occurred in silence, in the way a thing breaks that has no language for breaking. The hardest figure to lose was a Jesuit priest named Father Anselmo Reyes. Father Reyes had been the spiritual center of Barracks 12. He had performed funerals for the dead of the first winter using only his memory of the rite, because he had no breviary and no paper. He had baptized 17 children. He had heard confessions in the cold rooms before the circles, and he had, by his own later admission, been the one who suggested to Marin Holloway that the circles needed a structure if they were going to survive. Father Reyes accepted the reassignment on the 73rd day of cycle 245. He was 61 years old. The recovered records do not explain why. His confessor, an elderly woman named Bridget Halloran, told the tribunal 8 years later that Father Reyes had said, in his final week, "I have carried them for as long as I can carry them, and I am tired, and God will remember what I cannot." He blessed the departing in a ceremony on the morning of the 73rd day. He blessed 240 other volunteers. He walked back into Barracks 12 after the ceremony, and he wept in the cold room for an hour, and then he reported to the medical wing for intake. The coalition's records confirm that the procedure was performed successfully. The coalition's records do not record what Father Reyes was called after the procedure, or what world he was sent to, or whether he ever, in his new and coalition standard life, recovered the capacity to mourn the people he no longer remembered losing. This is, I am told, what the humans mean when they speak of the worst kind of mercy. I have asked 17 humans to explain the phrase to me. The 17 explanations did not agree. Part 5. The coalition's response to the humans who refused reassignment was, at first, patient. The program was voluntary. The coalition had no legal authority under the Cultural Stabilization Act to compel submission. Administrator Vesh Koren issued a directive to the Moon's overseers instructing them to permit the refusing population to continue their agricultural work without harassment. The directive was followed. The harassment, when it began, came from outside the directive's authority. Tomas Iverson was 34 years old. He had been a carpenter in a small city in the Norwegian region of Earth before the relocation. He had no surviving family. He had attended the Barracks 4 circle every week since its inception, and he had, by the testimony of his bunkmate, memorized the names spoken in every circle he had attended. In the spring of cycle 246, Tomas Iverson began carving the names into the underside of his bunk. He used a fragment of bone from the agricultural rotation. He carved at night, in the dark, by feel. He carved in a small, consistent script that the surveillance drones could not see because the drones did not look at the undersides of bunks. He carved 4,072 names over 14 months. He was discovered when a bunk inspection in the 81st day of cycle 247 revealed structural compromise to the bunk's load-bearing frame. The overseer who reported the carving did not understand what it was. The overseer reported it as vandalism. Tomas Iverson was tried under the coalition's property damage statutes, convicted, and executed by lethal injection on the 94th day. His body was returned to the agricultural soil unmarked, as was standard for coalition executions on labor moons. The bunk was replaced. The underside of the old bunk was incinerated. The names existed nowhere else. Except that they did. Tomas Iverson had recited the names aloud in the cold room of Barracks 4 on every week of the 14 months he had been carving. The community had heard them. The community had remembered. The bunk was a redundancy. I confess, in this section of the report, that I do not understand why Tomas Iverson carved the names if he had already given them to the community to hold. I have asked. The humans I have asked have said only that some things must be written down even when they do not need to be. I do not know what that means. I am required by my function to record that I do not know. Priya Chandrasekaran was 41 years old. She had been a registered nurse in the South Indian city of Chennai before the relocation. She had been assigned to the medical wing on Kessler-9, where she worked under coalition medical officers as a translator and assistant. Priya Chandrasekaran taught the children of Barracks 9 the periodic table of elements as a memory game. She did this because she believed, and stated in the cold room circle of Barracks 9 on the 31st day of cycle 246, that the children needed to carry information that was not only names. They need to know that we knew things, the surviving transcript records her saying. They need to know we were not only what was done to us. She also, separately, refused the reassignment intake 3 times when it was offered to her by Administrator Vesh-Koran himself, who had taken a personal interest in recruiting her because of her medical training and her potential value to the coalition's post-reassignment workforce. In the winter of cycle 247, Priya Chandrasekaran contracted pneumonia. She declined to enter the medical wing. The medical wing required, as a condition of treatment, that all human patients submit to a preliminary reassignment counseling session. She would not submit. She died in the cold room of Barracks 9 on the 14th day of the winter rotation. The children of Barracks 9, by the testimony of survivors, can still recite the periodic table in the order she taught it. Daniel Okafor was 56 years old. He had been an agricultural engineer in the Nigerian region of Earth. He refused the reassignment 3 times in the standard intake interviews. He was, after the 3rd refusal, reassigned to the deep mineral mines on the Moon's southern hemisphere, which was the coalition's standard response to humans who had become administratively inconvenient without committing any chargeable offense. The deep mines operated on 6-month rotations. The rotation crews were drawn from the human population. Daniel Okafor was placed in the rotation in the autumn of cycle 246. Over the next 4 rotations, he taught the rotation crews 611 names. He did this during the work shifts, in the dark, in the brief intervals when the overseer's attention was elsewhere. He told the crews who the names had belonged to. He told the crews where the people had lived and what they had done and how they had died. The crews carried the names back to their barracks at the end of each rotation. By the end of the 4th rotation, 611 names that had existed only in Daniel Okafor's memory had been distributed across 31 barracks. In the autumn of cycle 248, Daniel Okafor did not return from the rotation. The coalition's records list his death as industrial accident, unrecovered remains. I have read the accident report. The report contains 3 internal inconsistencies that the coalition's own forensic protocols would normally have flagged. The report was not flagged. The twins Lena and Ilse Bauer were 23 years old. They had been university students in the German city of Leipzig before the relocation. They had been assigned to Barracks 22. They had developed in the 3rd year after the relocation a practice that the other humans in Barracks 22 found unsettling. Each twin memorized the other twin's life completely, not as siblings sharing memories, but as a deliberate redundancy. If one died, the other could speak for both. They could, by the testimony of their barracks, finish each other's recitations in the cold room circle without rehearsal, switching the first person without flinching. Ilse Bauer died of a fever in the winter of cycle 247. Lena Bauer continued to attend the circle. She continued to recite. When she recited her sister's memories, she used the first person. When the other humans in Barracks 22 called for Ilse, Lena answered. When they called for Lena, Lena answered. The overseers, who did not distinguish between the twins on any document, did not notice for nearly 2 years. In the autumn of Cycle 249, the overseers conducted a population audit and discovered the discrepancy. Lena Bauer was separated from Barracks 22 and reassigned to the medical wing for observation. The coalition's psychological evaluators were unable to determine whether she was suffering from a dissociative disorder or whether she was, as she claimed, carrying both of us until one of us is enough. She remained in the medical wing for the rest of her life. She died in Cycle 254 at the age of 29. She answered in her final week to both names. The man known only as the Welshman was, according to all surviving testimony, somewhere between 45 and 60 years old. No one in any of the barracks had ever learned his name. He had arrived in the third relocation wave and had been assigned to Barracks 31. He spoke a language that no one else on Kessler-9 understood. He sang in that language. He sang every night, quietly in his bunk, and he sang in the cold room circle when his turn came. And the humans of Barracks 31 listened to the songs without comprehension for 6 years. In the autumn of Cycle 248, a 9-year-old girl in Barracks 31, born on Kessler-9, registered as Subject 31 Alpha 4 and called Carries by her parents, began to transcribe the songs phonetically into the dirt of the barracks floor with a pebble. She did this for 2 cycles. She memorized the phonetic transcriptions. When the Welshman died in the winter of Cycle 250, Carries was the only person on the moon, and possibly in any place the coalition had ever administered, who could still produce the sounds of the language he had sung in. She did not know what the words meant. She knew only that he had sung them and that they had mattered to him and that someone had to keep making the sounds. I will note here in the formal voice of this report that I do not understand why the child preserved sounds whose meaning she could not access. I have asked. The humans have said that meaning is not the only thing a word carries. I have recorded the answer. I do not yet know what to do with it. Part 6. Maren Holloway was arrested on the 4th day of Cycle 252. She was 78 years old. The charges, filed under an emergency revision to the Cultural Stabilization Act that had been passed 3 months earlier specifically to address what the coalition had begun calling the Kessler-9 problem, listed her as the principal organizer of coordinated cultural sedition. The tribunal convened on the 11th day. The tribunal was held in the administrative center of the Moon's primary settlement. The proceedings were recorded by coalition procedural drones, and the recording was sealed under tribunal authority and remained sealed for 63 years. The recording is the basis for this report. The prosecution presented its case for 2 days. The prosecution called 11 witnesses, of whom 7 were coalition administrators and 4 were humans who had taken the reassignment and had since been recalled to provide expert testimony on the pre-reassignment human community. The 4 humans answered the prosecution's questions accurately. They did not remember Maren Holloway. They did not remember the circles. They had been told what they had once been part of, and they testified to it as a matter of historical record, with the calm neutrality of strangers describing a country they had read about in a book. Maren Holloway, when asked if she wished to testify in her own defense on the 13th day, said that she did. She rose from her seat. She had been provided with a chair in deference to her age. She declined the chair. She stood. She faced the tribunal. She said, "I would like to enter into the record the names of the people of Kessler-9 who have not been entered into the record." The presiding officer of the tribunal, a coalition jurist of the Mur-Halen species, ruled that the request was procedurally valid. Coalition tribunal law, written before the coalition had ever encountered a species like the humans, permits a defendant unrestricted speech during the defendant's own statement, on the grounds that any restriction would compromise the defendant's right to a complete defense. The right is absolute. The right has no time limit. The coalition had never needed a time limit. No defendant in the coalition's recorded history had ever wanted one. Marin Holloway began to speak. She began with her own name. She gave her full name. She gave her date of birth, her place of birth, her parents' names, her husband's name, her daughter's name. She gave 31 details about her daughter, who had died at the age of 9 in a refugee column outside the city of Winnipeg in the second year after first contact. Then she gave the names of 17 children she had taught in her 31 years as a teacher, with a sentence each about who they had been. Then she began on the people of Kessler 9. She spoke for the rest of the 13th day. She spoke through the 14th day. She spoke through the 15th day. The tribunal recessed for sleep cycles and reconvened. Marin Holloway did not sleep. She drank water when it was provided. She refused food. She continued. She spoke for 4 days. The coalition's medical officers attended her on the 3rd day. They informed the tribunal that the defendant's cardiac function was deteriorating. The tribunal asked Marin Holloway if she wished to suspend her statement. She said she did not. The tribunal had no authority to compel suspension. On the morning of the 5th day, the 411th hour of her statement, Marin Holloway said the name Eleanor Coombs, born in the British city of Bristol in the year corresponding to Earth Standard 2197, schoolteacher, married once, no children, died in the second winter of Kessler 9 of what the medical wing called cardiac adjustment failure, who was my closest friend in this place and who asked me, 3 days before she died, to make sure someone remembered her. She paused for the first time in 4 days. She said someone has. Her heart failed 31 seconds later. She was pronounced dead at the witness stand. The tribunal's procedural drones had recorded every name. The recording was sealed. The coalition's procedural law required the recording's preservation. The recording was preserved. She had spoken 11,047 names. The archive that had been built over 6 years to erase the humans of Kessler 9 became, by procedural accident, the largest single record of them that has ever existed. The coalition could not legally destroy the recording without nullifying the tribunal's authority. The tribunal's authority had been used to convict and execute 143 other humans on related charges in the years since. The coalition could not afford to nullify the tribunal's authority. The recording sat sealed for 63 years. It is the basis of this report. Part 7. The conventional historians of the coalition mark cycle 261 as the end of the Kessler 9 question. That cycle corresponds to the closure of the agricultural operation, the relocation of the surviving 482 humans to temperate worlds under the standard reassignment protocols, and the Moon's reassignment to mineral extraction under non-organic labor. But the question worth sitting with in the chamber of this tribunal is not when Kessler 9 ended. The question is what was actually built there and what its ending actually meant. The humans of Kessler 9 were not heroes in any simple sense. They were a relocated agricultural population. They were not warriors. They did not free themselves. They did not defeat the coalition. They did not stop the cultural reassignment program, which continues under revised protocols in 11 coalition systems as of the date of this report. The 482 humans who survived to cycle 261 accepted the reassignment they had refused for 16 years. The records of their new lives are sealed under privacy provisions. They are presumably comfortable. They are presumably at peace. They do not remember Marin Holloway. Administrator Yul Veshkoren retired from the Cultural Stabilization Bureau in cycle 258. He published, in his retirement, 3 monographs on what he continued to call humane transition. He died in cycle 271 at his home on the inner system world of Karth. His published memoirs describe Kessler 9 as the most difficult and most rewarding work of my career, in which I had the privilege of relieving a great deal of unnecessary suffering. The records show that he believed this. The records show that he died believing it. The Fourth Coalition Science to study the Kessler 9 tribunal recording, after it was unsealed in Cycle 315, was the field that the VTHRE call Participatory Memorial Studies, which is the field in which I was trained. The field exists, in part, because of the recording. The field did not exist before. I should disclose, in the formal voice of this report, that my own designation was assigned to me by my hatching cohort in the standard VTHRE manner, which is to say, it was assigned to me as a function of my role, and has been revised 3 times in my professional life. I have never had a personal name in the human sense. No VTHRE has. The concept, when I first encountered it in the recording, was something I logged in my preliminary notes as cognitively interesting but functionally redundant. I was 23 cycles into my study when I logged that. I no longer believe what I wrote. I have, in the course of preparing this report, spoken aloud to myself, in the privacy of my study, 341 of the names from the recording. I have done this for reasons that I cannot fully account for in the language of my own species. The VTHRE do not have a word for the practice. The closest term in our linguistic register translates approximately to receiving a transmission whose recipient is the transmitter. It is not a term we use in normal speech. It is a term from our pre-coalition theological writings, which most modern VTHRE consider obsolete. I will end this report with a single act for which I have no procedural authorization. I will speak a name. Marin Holloway. I have spoken it. The recording of this report has captured it. The tribunal's archive will preserve it under the same procedural law that preserved her own statement. I am aware that by speaking the name, I have become, by the definition the humans themselves used, a person who carries her now. I am aware that my carrying is partial and inadequate and limited by a cognitive architecture that was not designed for this kind of weight. I am aware that I am the first VTHRE to do this. I am aware that I will not be the last. The Coalition keeps no record of the 482 humans who took the reassignment in Cycle 261. They wanted peace. They received it. I do not judge them. The humans I have spoken with do not judge them either. The humans I have spoken with say only that some weights are too heavy to carry forever, and that the people who set them down deserve the same grace as the people who did not. But somewhere in the frozen soil of Kessler 9, in the agricultural fields that are no longer worked by any organism, there are 11,047 names spoken into a sealed recording that the Coalition could not legally destroy. There are 4,072 names carved into a bunk that was incinerated 68 years ago, and that exists now only in the memory of the people who heard them recited in a cold room before the morning shift. There are songs in a language that one woman on a temperate world who was once called Carries still sings to herself when she is alone, though she does not know what the words mean and has never been told. And there is a VTHRE archivist who can pronounce one of the names. The humans did not win. The Empire did not lose. But the humans were not erased, and the Empire's archive, which was built to erase them, is now the thing that holds them. This is what they meant. This is what they built. This is what they died refusing to set down. The remembering became history.